This is what you want. This is what you get. This is what
You have located GeekFest Rants, the entertainment podcast for genre geeks like you.
Shall we play a game?
Covering the world of vintage and current film and television since 2010.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Featuring in-depth conversations on sci-fi, horror, fantasy, comics, toys, and conventions.
So say we all. So say we all.
And now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show.
The 24th century continues. On Star Trek, The Next Generation. All the drama, the wonder, and excitement of Gene Roddenberry's original Space Odyssey are here in a new age of high adventure. Follow the voyages of the new Starship Enterprise and the lives of her crew. On Star Trek, The Next Generation.
Everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and today we are dipping for a second time into a video presentation. We did it last time for our Playmate Borg special that we did. This time around, we are kind of continuing in a similar theme because we are still on Star Trek. We are exploring the world of uniforms, specifically with Next Generation, but we are obviously going to look at the whole uniform landscape, you know, from the early shows, the modern shows, the movies, and, you know, all the different places where we actually see a continuation or an evolution, if you will, of the Trek genre uniforms. Joining me this time, I'm going to have Steve Folks, who's going to chime in on quite a bit on, you know, all these different advancements and how some of these uniforms kind of cross from show to show, and one will influence the other and one will dictate the other and that sort of thing. So let's start today's episode with Star Trek uniforms.
Television is not the truth. Television is an amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business.
Okay, today's topic, as we mentioned before, is going to be Star Trek: The Next Generation uniforms. And joining me once again, I have Steve. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hey, Carlos. Hey, everyone.
Believe it or not, these shows just keep coming because the insane topics that we can think of that just kind of pop into your mind, it's endless. And the way that we got to where we are today is due to a previous episode that I did about Borg action figures. The overall goal here, I don't know if I'll achieve it, is to be able to review most of the action figures that Playmates put out, you know, for Star Trek, and being able to separate them into categories, not necessarily going season 1, season 2, season 3, or even the order that they're released, but in categories. So for example, I hit all the Borg, then I'm going to probably hit all the Klingons and Worf, you know, stuff like that. I want to kind of separate it like that. But one of the things that I started to notice when trying to organize all these different figures is all the different uniforms that especially Next Generation had. And much more complicated than the other series, whether it's DS9 or Enterprise or Voyager or whatever, or even the movies, is the fluctuating uniform details that change during the Next Generation. So before we get to Next Generation, Steve, let's go a little bit before that in terms of chronological order. And let's go in real chronological order, if you will, because the funny thing is that the newer Star Trek shows actually take place before all of this stuff that we're talking about now. So let's hit a little bit of Enterprise and Discovery, and then the original series, just to kind of give a broad stroke of like the uniforms and how those have progressed. So I guess Would Enterprise be the beginning?
Yeah, I would say so. I think Enterprise definitely would be the place to start if you want to do chronological.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, those uniforms, the Discovery uniforms, are pretty unique compared to some of the other uniforms that we see later on.
Right. But yeah, when you look at the detail for the Discovery ones, they're pretty crazy in terms of, like, there are certain things I didn't notice until I actually saw pictures of, like, close-up pictures. But with Enterprise, I think we were mainly looking at a jumpsuit. It's like a space jumpsuit, if you will. And that's kind of like what they kind of went for. It is completely outside the realm of the original series. The original series is something completely different. It's very 60s, if you will. You know, it's the show is grounded in that time period and what that time period people thought the future would be like, or at least Gene Roddenberry. So when we're looking at Enterprise, you're looking at very plain, you know, there is the Starfleet influence in them, but you're talking about a generic jumpsuit with very minimal change as far as rank and that sort of thing goes, right?
Yeah. When I was doing a lot of research into like early NASA space flight and everything, which I've gotten to like an obsession with recently, it's definitely very reminiscent of the early, and even in the 80s when they had the blue flight suits, basically. Yeah. And it's very utilitarian. It has like, if you look at the uniform, it has like zipper pockets. Like it looks like, you know, these are work uniforms. Like if you're going up to space and you need to fix something, or if it's less about the showmanship that the Vader uniform had, and these uniforms are more about, you know, getting something done, basically, and, you know, worrying about looking good later on. Right.
The little that we did get that you could kind of link to the original series, I would say, is the lining. There was a line they would have on the shoulder.
The piping of the colors. Yeah.
That would give you those colors, and those colors pretty much matched the original series. In other words, you had the gold, the red, or the blue, depending on what branch, you know, you belonged to. So at least, you know, we had that going for ourselves in terms of how that worked. Now, let's move on to Discovery a little bit, because that is not only the most current one that we're dealing with, and also when you're trying to make that connection of how it changed, that would be the obvious next step. Now, what do you think of Discoveries?
It was a good, like, now this is a topic that people are, you know, once they saw them, apparently, you know, this caused people to go up in arms, which I don't understand at all. But it does seem like a very good intermediary step between the Enterprise and what we get in TOS. They're very Navy, I mean, in terms of color and, you know, military brands, they seem very naval to me. Like they're very stiff, they're thicker, and they have, like, you know, the gold banding or the silver banding. Oh, yeah. So when I first saw them, I immediately thought of like a naval captain in like the you know, the 60s, or it seemed very, very naval and very militaristic. You can definitely see it was turning from the work uniforms Enterprise had into now of the more regal-looking, you know, pristine, stiff, you know, uniforms that we're more accustomed to.
Yeah, definitely. I could see, like you said, the utilitarian, you know, work suit is kind of gone. You know, all those zippers and pockets, they're kind of faded. You're getting away from that, and that's something. It's funny because pockets is something that eventually they get rid of completely, more or less.
Yeah, you don't see anything.
For most of the uniforms. But what's funny here is that they do get rid of, or not get rid of, but modify the coloring schemes. They no longer go three ways in colors. They now only, like you said, go for silver and gold. That's how they kind of differentiate everybody, and that's it. So that's kind of interesting, you know, in those colors that they pick, which, you know, all of a sudden, when we now jump forward, you know, to the next level of Star Trek, that being the original series, now we're talking classic. And that is, in a way, retroactively, how these other two were built, because obviously that came first. These are the last things that came. So it's a gigantic retcon game that we're playing. However, during season 2, through the Pike episodes, we do get a start at seeing the more traditional original colors and uniforms. You know, we're kind of working our way there. So we do get a peek at the gold for command. We get the security red, you know, we get the blues, I believe. We also get that. So in a way, they were able to kind of branch and link, you know, what is supposed to come next in the evolution of uniforms as far as the timeline goes. while the Discovery crew remains with their special uniforms, we do see, like I said, the Pike crew looking a lot more like what we're used to for the original series. What do you remember of the classic, shirts? Because they're not really, I wouldn't call them uniforms. They were shirts. They were really shirts.
Yeah, they were definitely shirts and sweaters. I mean, because and I don't mean that as like in a bad way, but I believe Pike. We see Pike in like a sort of like beige, sort of like sort of like a turtleneck sort of shirt, and then Kirk later on has like sort of like just a I guess you can call it like a tunic, I guess. And it's just like the yellow tunic, and it doesn't really, like, on the surface to me, it doesn't really come off as being military. It comes off as being
not at all.
It comes off as being, I would hate to even say the word loungewear, but it's very informal, which is funny. And I believe that I think the only thing that's really stands out, I think they have like the band on their wrist. I think
the rank is in the wrist. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing about Pike, and that might also have been influenced by the fact that because the show had a pilot that was then reshot, they were able to modify it and tweak the costumes a little more. But yeah, the original Pike sweater is much fuller, much I don't know if it's suede or whatever it is, but it doesn't feel like it's just cloth. It's just a different material.
Satin, but it feels like I mean, I never feel it, but it looks like it has like a sort of textured feel to it, like plush or something.
And then that's where the real colors were established. Anything gold, it's like the executive branch, the command branch. Then anything blue would be like science and medical. Red would either be security or I guess communications. That's how they kind of spread them out. And what's also weird is that, the one I remember the most, or the one I think most people can associate with the most, Kirk always had gold. Kirk was gold where Kirk was gold. We get it. Kirk was gold. But every now and then he would wear this green one with a double-breasted shirt almost with a flap in the middle, kind of like, and like a, what do you call that thing? Like a cumberbatch almost sometimes in the stomach. And it's like, I can't tell if back then he was already trying to hide his gut or what the deal was, but he does have, and the reason I notice it also is because of the action figures. It's like, oh my God, I have so many Kirk versions, from Playmates. And yeah, there's different shirts. It's like, wow, it's funny how even though he did have all these different shirts, it's the gold one that kind of sticks. When you first think of Star Trek, that's the gold shirt. That's the one that you go with.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if maybe I'm not sure. I haven't the basis on, but I'm wondering because Kirk is the only one that I noticed that had these dramatic shifts in uniform.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm wondering if this is something that William Shatner maybe requested. He wanted to stand out maybe a bit more from the other crew, or if he wants something a bit more distinctive. Because I noticed that. At least to my, I haven't watched the original series in so long, but I'm not sure if any of the other crew had those dramatic shifts in uniform. Because his, I remember he would have the, like you said, like the green tunic with the breast, cut down the middle. But then sometimes he would go back to the yellow shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
So it seemed to like back and forth. So it's very weird.
The only thing it would be no shock to me that Shatner would demand something like that because he is notoriously a diva, and wants to stand out. I get that. I understand that. The other thing is also that from what I remember, and this is something that carried on to the later series, is that didn't they usually have, whenever like an admiral would visit or somebody of a higher rank, they had to make him look different. So they either gave him a lot of medals or they gave him a little kind of accent or accessory to the shirt to just make him look a little more regal. So I'm imagining, well, maybe that's the thing. He's the captain, so he does get a little extra perk as far as his uniform goes. And I'm not talking about a dress uniform because that's different. They did show us in certain episodes what the dress uniform, just like a naval academy. Like you said, you have your dress and then you have your fatigues, your work uniform. So yeah, either one of those theories could work. Now, when we then jump, not necessarily to the next series, which would be the Next Generation, we do have a number of steps along the way getting to Next Generation through the movies, because the next evolution in uniforms that kind of change as you go along is with, for example, the motion picture, Star Trek the Motion Picture. With the motion picture, my God, talk about starting from scratch. What do you remember from that?
This whole movie is is so like muted. Like everything about this movie is so muted and so like underscoring itself. Like from the cinema, which is a completely different topic, but the uniforms in the motion picture, what I remember, they're again very plain, very
light blues and tans and whites
like
and
very muted colors. Like it's a very far departure from the original series, which was it had these fantastic, bright, vibrant colors, to where we get to the motion picture and everything is very dulled and muted and these like sandy colors. I guess you can make a point rather that might be more practical in a real life situation. Maybe, wearing a red shirt, bright red if you're going down to explore a planet may not be the most practical thing, but the coloring scheme on the motion picture I was never a fan of. It was just so plain and so sort of generic to me.
Well, that actually leads us on one of our many possible tangents here that I have... Shocking. I have heard the complaint that a lot of people say that, you're exploring space, you're going into uncharted areas with hostile environments, and everybody stands out like a fireworks in terms of, look at that red shirt guy, look at that blue shirt. It's like they don't try to blend in at all. And originally, those colors were very bright. They weren't very practical if you think about it. But here they did kind of tone down the colors, like you said. And not only that, but they kind of went like unicolor pretty much with most of the characters. Like the pants are not even black anymore, and it's not just the shirt; it's the whole thing. So you're either all tan, all blue, all white. For example, communications and ops, they're wearing these complete tan outfits, and they're also pretty tight. They're tighter than before. At least with the black pants. Black pants usually hide any kind of tightness. They kind of help you, especially if you're not in good shape. And the shirts, same thing. I mean, granted, you have Scotty, he's an older gentleman, and even in the late 70s, you could kind of see the guy was kind of bulking out a little bit. They put him in all blue. There was no red. That's the thing. They got away from the red, at least in those colors, but they kind of seem to substitute, instead of red, now you have white. There's a lot of white. The medical gets white. Command, which is Kirk, he gets a combination of everybody's colors. He has the white,
the white middle,
the white middle chest, but he's got the blue arms and the blue pants. But then he has the gold rank on the sleeves also. So it's kind of like a mishmash of everything. They were trying, and there's some things I really like about that costume, and there's some things I really don't like about the costume. Part of the fact is that they completely abandoned it after the first movie. Now, as you move on to the next couple of movies, they apparently touched upon something that kind of stuck, and that is the red double-breasted jacket with the puffy collar and the gold accent everywhere. That to me, when I think Star Trek movies, that's what, even though motion picture is the one that started it all as far as movies, the gold is it, because it carried on through so many of those movies.
Yeah, this is definitely one of my favorites. This is from Wrath of Khan, and this style of uniform is first of all, when you compare it to the first movie, it's way more. I mean, to me at least, it feels far more formal and far more military. Like this is what like a military would look like. It seems very like
it's a jacket. It's a jacket.
It's like a formal looking jacket here, and like the collar has like coloring for looks like for the command, and it has
right. So that's how we can tell them apart. That's how we can.
And it has a little strap.
And the strap,
which I love in Wrath of Khan, where after Khan beats him the first time, Shatner takes it off, and, like has it hanging down,
and it has the blood from the dead crewmen on it. It's like, oh wow, he's so cool. Now, what's cool about this also is that in later films, like it might have been Star Trek 3, where we get to see the field jacket, which is a version of a much thicker, now the pockets come back, wintry type red jacket that they can wear when they're outdoors. And that's kind of cool, too, to see that.
Yeah. I thought that was in Star Trek 2. I think that was Wrath of Khan 2. Where doesn't Kirk have the jacket on? Where is it the fluffy collar?
Yeah, you might be right. And I think they also had it on. Whenever they go to a harsh environment, they have to. You got to cover that jacket.
Yeah, it actually looks really comfortable, actually. And like the nice fur around the neck and everything.
Oh, yeah. And like I said, I love all the pockets they put into those jackets because you're like, what's that for? What does that do? And what does this do?
Yep.
Now, the rest of the movies with the original crew, I think the uniforms pretty much stayed the same, or pretty much. They stuck to that red jacket, but you saw a lot of like leisure wear, like civilian clothing that changed throughout. Which again, that you can't really nail them down for anything because it's civilian wear. They're going to wear different things, and you gotta just accept it. But that red jacket with the black pants, again, they separated the colors again. They didn't go for the unicolor. They separated it to black bottoms and red tops. Again, it doesn't help you with the theory of blending in. Now you got red people everywhere, and it's so easy to pick them apart if you're trying to shoot at them. But that lasted quite a bit, and these movies continued, let me think, up until Star Trek 3, Star Trek 4, and they're running away, so they're still wearing their uniforms. Star Trek 5, I think they were still wearing the red jackets around 5, unless they're hiding, unless they're pretending to be someone else. Star Trek 6, they're still wearing the red jackets, undiscovered country. And now we are getting close to Next Generation. However, before we actually reach Next Generation style of uniforms, we have to take into account, because we're talking chronologically here, that in Next Generation, there are a few episodes where they have these kind of flashbacks, if you will, of younger Picard, for example, or some other episodes where we see officers from Starfleet in their younger years, like Picard, where they're still wearing a variation of that classic red jacket. And the primary difference that they choose to go with, I believe, is that what is no longer there, because I guess, as time progressed and as they're modifying these uniforms, even though they kept the red jacket, they removed the frilly collar from whatever it is that they're wearing underneath. They're definitely wearing something underneath, some kind of undershirt. But in this particular state, you no longer see the frilly collar, which that collar is usually what tells you, what division, they're under, what they're studying, I guess, or what their specialty is, because we do still have the flap, on the shoulder that gives you different colors depending on what particular specialty they have. But like I said, that turtlenecky kind of thing is gone at this point. Now, from what I understand, with Next Generation, one of the first things they did was they rearranged the colors a little bit. So once again, they try to go in a different direction. And to me, it almost looks like they're kind of going a little bit in the direction of the motion picture, because all of a sudden they go for these kind of like tight-fitting unitard type of get-ups that are very slim, very tight, almost like no wrinkles whatsoever. The color scheme changes once again. Yellow is operations, anybody that's in a kind of like a technical area. Red is for the command crew, whether it's the captain or number one or some of the top command people, in order of command. And blue is the only one that kind of stays consistent because it's still science and medical. And the blue sometimes looks a little green. There's a little bit of a shift, and it could be. Now I don't know if that's an intentional color change, or maybe it was our old TVs and how things looked under certain lighting. I don't know, but like I said, blue stays the same, but yellow and red seem to kind of switch places. All of a sudden, the captain's no longer gold; he's red now.
Yeah. Command has red, and from what I remember when I first saw the TNG, especially like those first seasons, where to me it reminded me more of them going back to the TOS era, where there was no real collar on the shirts.
No,
it was just like them wearing just like a plain like pajama shirt, really. It was. I mean, it was formal in print. Like the printing on it had like a formality to it, but just the cut of it and the style of it didn't really lend itself well to it being a military vessel or even an exploratory vessel. It seemed very. It seemed like it was like something you would buy today in a store, if you wanted to buy like a cheap uniform or a cheap Halloween costume.
You're right.
It looked like something like that's the idea of what it was supposed to be, but just in a T-shirt style, basically.
What's interesting is, and I'm not going to have all the names because there's many names involved here, but one name, Willian Ware, he was apparently one of the or the designer of the original Star Trek television show, who came on to Next Generation to modernize the uniforms. So, you know, at least you can say that, well, it's not like somebody just went out of nowhere who had no clue what the show was about. No, this is the guy that did the previous one, so this is the direction he went. And what I'm thinking also is, well, maybe, you know, in typical Star Trek tradition, the Enterprise is not supposed to be a warship. It's kind of like and it's not necessarily a research ship. It's an exploration ship. So by the uniforms looking a little more casual, it kind of moves away from the military look, and it gives them a little bit of a more of a scientific, laid back look. Maybe that's where they were going with that. I don't know. The neck thing, yes. I always looked at the neck and I'm like, something looks right. You're seeing too much neck. It's like, it's just like, you know, what women, you know, sometimes when they have a low cut, you know, you could see the low cut is, you know, goes pretty low. But with the men, it looked a little weird to show so much neck. Like you said, it looks like they're wearing a T-shirt that kind of got worn too much, and now it's just kind of like, you got to fix that shirt.
I watched it a few more times.
It's like. And speaking of washing, this is a good segue into another tangent that, from what I understand, the cast hated those uniforms.
Yeah.
One problem was the material, which was some kind of spandexy material that apparently absorbed so much moisture that even after washing them, they would still stink. And, you know, they just would complain about them because the fabric would always be in a state of being pulled, because they wanted everybody to be smooth, you know, whether you're sitting down or standing up. They didn't want to have anything wrinkly or anything like that, which is great for that material because that's the purpose of that material. One of the complaints I heard, especially from Patrick Stewart, was that the pulling was so much that he was hurting his shoulders from being pulled so much, you know, as he was walking or doing whatever he was doing.
Yep. And I heard, and I guess maybe we can talk about this later, or if we want to touch into it now, but there was a lot of complaints from the female cast of Next Generation who had a lot of problems with, in particular, a lot of like the low cut that Troy was wearing. Had a lot of it was just too awkward. It was sort of humiliating, I think, for her as well. But that might be a bit. Well, we can touch on that later. But yeah, those first uniforms from the first few seasons, they really didn't do much for me, really.
The other thing that they tried to kind of get away from and transition out of, if you will, is the idea of the skirt, which kind of led to some bizarre choices in the process. But they kind of had to get this out of their system through the first season and try it out and completely crash and fail.
Yeah, the first episode, I think, had the debut of the scant.
The scant. We can do a whole show just about the scant. The scant is supposed to be, at least when a woman is wearing it, a more modern version of not the crazy mini skirt that they wore in the 60s, which again, it screams 60s. It's how on earth would anybody wear, like, what rank of the military would approve such a thing, you know? So what they had now is more like a shirt. It's like a short dress almost, you know, not super tight skirty, but a little, I would say, somewhere between the knee and a mini skirt. So it's like a slightly lower cut skirt. Yeah. But what's bizarre is the fact that there's a lot of bizarre things about it. One thing is that they sometimes combined it with some kind of legging or no leggings at all. They experimented with trying to cover the legs a little bit while you were in the scant. But the most bizarre thing was they got men to wear that, which it's funny because nowadays I remember seeing something about rompers on the internet that guys were wearing these, like, I don't know if you call them like baby outfits or something. I can't even make heads or tails of what the whole point of that is. But in a couple of Next Gen episodes, you do see men wearing these little skirt things. And it might have happened maybe 2 or 3 episodes. They kind of have a quick shot of a guy and it's different. I think it's like 3 different guys are wearing them. And it just kind of calls so much attention to us. And I understand, okay, they're trying to make this is a period in time where there is no sexual identity having to do with what you're wearing, but it hits you like a freight train when you see it.
Yeah, and actually, Picard and Riker there's a scene of them walking down the hallway, and they have I think it's the scant, but it has like you were saying, like the black leggings.
But I think it's because of that was one of the earlier dress uniforms.
Right.
where you have the big, gigantic, solid, like bib thing that goes to your knees, like top to bottom. I'm talking about it's the scant. It's a dress. It's the same thing they made an actress wear. They put it on a guy and say, okay, now you walk this way and just look happy. Yeah, we'll talk about those because those uniforms changed a lot. They were close to the scant, and then they pulled back, and they pulled, and they kept pulling.
That's the one thing I do have a complaint with this is that there's no official naming for any of these uniforms, so it's very hard to delineate. I mean, the scant is something I think I'm not even sure if that's even an official term used in the Star Trek. There's no actual real name.
It's I think it's a behind the scenes. It's a behind the scenes type of thing.
Yeah. I really wish they would, go in and actually give each of these uniforms and their styles an actual name to make it easier to talk about. Because we're trying to, go by era and go by, when, so we can describe it by, when each uniform debuted. And it's very hard. It'd be great if each one had an actual name or something attached to it.
It's funny because if you do a search on the internet for scant, you're going to get all kinds of scants. And there's going to be two pictures that pop up that will make perfect sense. One of them is an actor with, I guess, kind of like a brown kind of hair. And he's wearing not the thigh boots, but kind of like ankle boots. So he's got black ankle boots, old legs showing up until the same, that same area. And the same kind of top that the women would be wearing. And there's another picture of a guy that, to me, looks like John Cho, the guy who now plays Sulu. And there's a shot of him like looking confused down the hallway, and he's got the same. They threw him in the same costume. And again, luckily, they tried it. It obviously didn't work, and it went away. However, for the women, they kept it for a little longer because I guess it kind of fit women a little better, but they slowly also started getting rid of showing leg, as part of the uniform. Even, you were mentioning earlier, Troy. At first, Troy, in a couple of the first episodes, is wearing an actual Starfleet uniform, a scant. But then later on, because she's really not, she's not military, she's a counselor, so they kind of, I guess they figured, well, you know what? She shouldn't be in a uniform. She should be wearing more civilian or whatever Betazoids wear. And even though that to me made logical sense, the choices of costumes they put her in were kind of weird and kind of very, I don't want to say unattractive. Again, the women in the show are not supposed to look like supermodels, but it almost seems like they try to ugly her up as much as possible. It's like, put her in something normal. They put her in these weird tight with the bun hair. It's like, I don't know.
I think you're trying to play into the whole that's what the Betazoid fashion sense I guess would be, and then
I guess you can blame it on that.
Yeah, that's the reason I always had for that must be what's really hot on Betazoid right now. Like I have no idea. They got really experimental with some of the stuff.
I know that. I mean, the costumes were like almost like exercise outfits. There was no I could not see any ethnicity in the clothes. I couldn't say, oh, that's a traditional Betazoid, blah blah blah. No, they just put her in these little tight, weird, not very appealing things. And it happened a number of times. And that's one of the things, I noticed with the figures is that it's like, you look at the Troy figure and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's a hard to find figure, but yeah, it's really not that good of a figure, but whatever. Again, we're not focusing on civilians, we're focusing on uniforms. But going back to the initial uniform, you had, like I said, we had the full outfit top to bottom. There's also a different look when it comes to where the midriff or the stomach cut happens. Because it was a one-piece outfit, they had, instead of a separation between the black pants and the red shirt, let's say red, for example, if we're talking about a red one, there is no straight line in the waist. It's kind of like a triangular cut.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's supposed to kind of be kind of like the Star Trek symbol, the Federation symbol, to try to give it a subliminal triangle on it. But that's something that they kept for a while. The other thing that they added to this particular costume that we hadn't seen before is that the insignia now, because it's a more modern show, became the communicator, which back then was completely different.
Yeah, which we now know retroactively now in Discovery. It was Section 31 who invented that.
They're really sneaky, and I love that kind of retconning.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. I never really thought about little because you're right. It has uniform has like that little the black kind of rises up above for like a little bit, like a little
Yeah, it
triangle
goes up
shape.
and then it comes up under their arm. It's it's like almost like a W. It's like a big W under their chest. And the other thing they also added to this uniform that we hadn't seen before is the pips. Instead of the cuffs having the lines, now they put little pips depending on your rank. Up near the I guess the collar or the lack of collar. That kind of a thing.
the rim of the neck.
Now another thing that you probably would notice, and again I never noticed this before, and I think I'm only noticing it now because. Not only I've been researching this, but I've been watching the show on HD on Netflix. Back when I watched it, at home, I was watching it on a 4x3, old analog, an old television, maybe on VHS, in God knows what mode I was recording it, that it would look so kind of muddy. I see so much, because I'm in the process, I talked to Steve about this, I'm in the process of rewatching the entire Next Generation run. I'm somewhere in the 3rd season right now, and because I'm doing this particular show, I've been going crazy looking at costumes, and it's like, wow, look at that. Right down the middle, there's a zipper. There's an actual zipper, and there was an episode where I think Beverly was like possessed by some kind of crazy alien, and she's like hitting on Picard, and she unzips, a little bit, and you can actually see that there is a zipper right down the middle of this original style uniform. So that's how they're supposed to get in and out of that uniform. But you do see that seam right down the middle.
Right. Is Next Generation, is that did they remaster that for 1080p for like HD, or am I thinking of TOS? Did they do that for?
I'm not sure, but all I know is that it looks damn good.
Yeah.
It looks like I've never seen it look like that.
Yeah,
it
might have been a remaster. I'm rewatching Deep Space Nine, and that show could really go for like an HD update. I think a lot of it would look really, really, really good.
I know, and that's one of the shows. I don't think has DS9 been released in Blu-ray, or is that one of these that are still pending?
I think it's one of those that's still pending, I believe.
Oh wow, yeah, but I mean, to me, again, because I haven't seen the show since God knows when, it does look amazing looking at it now. On an HD set.
I'm sure, yeah.
Oh, it's a big difference. Now, getting back to what you brought up earlier when we were talking about the dress uniforms. Again, one of the things I noticed that, yes, the dress uniforms, they themselves progress and they change. And you mentioned, at first it looked like a gigantic scant, like a romper, like something. It was like what an old lady would wear to bed in the 1800s. It's like, what the hell is he wearing? And with the legs and the tight, it's like, whatever. So what's interesting about that is that it does have the first time, at least for these modern uniforms, these next generation uniforms, whether it's fake or real, I'm not sure, but the cross-breasted flap. The dress uniforms are the first ones that we can actually see that big, gigantic flap. And you can kind of say, well, there it is. That could be the bridge between the movies, the red jacket flap, and they didn't bring the flap to the actual uniforms people wear every day, but at least the dress uniforms are getting the remnants of the flap. And depending on how important you are, also for when it comes to like admirals or whatever, when they show up with these fancy uniforms, like those flaps could be thicker and and more distinguished. There's an episode I think where Q pretends to be one, and he's got like the biggest freaking gold trim. It's like, come on, dude, what are you doing? He's like, but it's Q, so he gets away with that sort of thing. So that's really interesting. At a certain point, they change. We move on to season 2. The costumes pretty much stay the same, but they have a new designer. Her name was Dorian Rice Wood. And from what I've read, she wanted to make some changes, but they kind of wouldn't let her change too many things. She wanted to mess with the costumes themselves because everybody was complaining, but they wanted to continue for whatever reason. She's also credited for the design of the Borg costume, the very basic original Borg costume. So even though she wasn't able to do major changes to the regular uniforms, she did contribute quite a bit to the whole genre, the whole lore of Star Trek. But by the time we get to season 3, this is where we see the next evolution of the costumes.
Yeah, the next step.
Exactly. At this point, we have Robert Blackman, and he will continue on for quite a while, practically many, many seasons, almost into some of the movies at some point, the Generation movies, where he did get the permission and they were allowed to, like, you know what, everybody's complaining too much. Patrick Stewart he's going to the doctor because he says that it's hurting him so much. And it's like, how much of it is, again, him being a diva too, because he's got to be the Shatner of the group, and how much it is it really, really, the smelly costumes and the painful costumes and this and that. So all of a sudden we get a new design. Now let's talk about the new design. What we have now is basically a two-piece outfit that from afar is basically the same as the old one in terms of where the colors are and where everything is at, except that now it's a completely different material. It's not spandex anymore. It's something different. It's something that doesn't pull. It doesn't absorb the humidity as much as the other one would. But it gives them a collar, a slight collar, so it covers up the neck. So it becomes a little more, to me, it looks more professional. What about you? How do you see it?
Yeah, no, professional I think is the perfect word for it. And even you can even just tell from like the material of it. I mean, maybe it just might be screen quality, but it looks like it's like a thicker, more serious material. Not like a more Halloween costume material. It looks like
it used to look almost shiny, like almost, it was like
a polyester. Yeah. I don't know what the material was, but it wasn't very flattering for me. But this style costume is, I think, where they sort of got their stride of what their show was going to be, this tone of it at least. And it has like the higher collar. It has like the pips that are still on the collar, but now it's an actual collar now. It's not like
right. They're up there on the pips. Yeah, they're on the collar.
And then I think the cut still looks the same from like, it still has like a triangle from like the little raised belt from the waist rather. So all that stays the same, but it just I think the material is the biggest thing, and the collaring on it, and it's that little change goes such a long way, really.
Oh yeah,
because when you think about it, like, it's not a huge change, but and also you can see that the black shoulders, there's more black on top.
Well, you get a little bit of a shoulder pad effect. I don't know if they were padding the shoulders, but it's no longer this curvy shoulder of however curvy the individual is. Yeah. Now it became more of a standard frame for a person.
Yeah, right.
And one thing I never noticed before, which if I'm reading this right, if I'm looking at it right, is that the original uniform also had a red accent V-shaped stripe between the pant and the boot. And now for this season 3 costume, it looks like they got rid of the color so that between the pant and the boot, it's all black. There is no extra accent on the leg, on the bottom of the, like near the ankle, the front of the ankle. The other thing is that, like I said before, this now is a two-piece. It's a top and a bottom. Yeah, however, there were some variations on those, primarily with women. With women, because they're still trying to accent womanly curves, if you will, they've made a number of outfits that were one piece. So they're no longer this synthetic, whatever the heck it was, material that made everything stretch, but they did not split them into two pieces. So you will see sometimes one-piece versions of those outfits.
Troy remains to be a outlier in all of this with her. It seems like they did give her a Star Trek uniform, but it's completely different than any of the other things the men were wearing. Like, it's a huge V cut.
Are you talking about the purple outfit?
It looks reddish. It looks like a dark.
See, I don't know if I would even consider that a uniform. I mean, to me, it still looks like a civilian, something she would just pull out of her closet.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to say. However, later in the series, when we get to the final seasons, specifically, I kind of trace it back to Chain of Command Part 2. That's the one where Picard gets captured. He's a POW under the Cardassians. And the captain that has taken over the Enterprise is Captain Jellicoe, played by Ronnie Cox, who plays him excellently. He plays a real bastard of a captain. He doesn't get along with anybody. He seems very friendly in 1 minute and a total bastard the next. One of the scenes involves Troy coming into his office, which is really Picard's office, to kind of talk him into maybe easing down a little bit and being not as harsh on everyone. And he kind of, at first, is in agreement with her in terms of he's kind of agreeing with her more or less, making her feel welcome. But then the conversation changes where he kind of tells her off more or less, and at the end he even says to her, "Oh, by the way, what you're wearing is not very appropriate. You should be wearing your uniform." And she kind of leaves there, all her feelings hurt and everything. And later in the episode, she starts wearing her uniform, which is something we haven't seen in a very long time, if not even ever. I mean, since the beginning of the series, when she was still wearing, I guess, if you guys remember the skants that we talked about. Yeah, I mean, it's really weird. All of a sudden, during these last seasons, her hair has changed and whatever. But hey, all of a sudden, she's wearing the blue uniform. So that's really interesting. And during the last season, she starts to alternate more and more. Between the jumpsuit, the exercise outfit, that purple or I think it's the purple one she wears the most, and then the uniform. And I guess it could have also been a preparation for the movie that they were going to do, Generations, where she is wearing the uniform, I think, for the majority of the movie. But this is a way of kind of maybe getting us used to having a full uniform crew. But it worked perfectly story-wise, with Captain Jellicoe being such a bastard and kind of talk her into, shaming her almost into doing it. But I think for Crusher, for example, especially season 3, when she returned, she went away, she came back. I believe at that point she has the one-piece version of that suit. But she also, in many episodes, she's also sometimes carrying a sweater, like a lab coat type of thing, over her uniform. So there's a slight variation there.
Yeah, which I always liked. I always thought that lab coat was kind of cool. I always liked the fact that, it's like a sort of like a Starfleet, lab coat to put over, because the military, the medical would have, their own. It
makes the character look different. The character stands out that way. Just like Worf has the stash, the Klingon sash. Yeah. Well, it stands out. Now, speaking of that sash, that is something that changes, just like his uniform from the first to the second season. On the first season, he's wearing the red uniform and the gold sash. By the time we get to the second season, because he's technically promoted to Chief of Security, I believe, he's now wearing the yellow uniform, but he has a different color sash. However, he is still wearing, obviously, the older uniform. That hasn't kicked in yet until the third season, when we do see that upgrade in uniforms where, all of a sudden he changes just like everybody else. Now, that's also a similar situation with Geordi, who goes from the first to the second season, basically changing color of uniforms. Once he becomes the chief engineer, he goes to the gold uniform, leaving behind his red uniform from the first season. So we still have all these variations taking place, in between, as they're kind of settling in. Data, on the other hand, there's just not much that happens with him as far as rank. He remains the same rank, doing the same job, basically, I think, throughout the entire series. However, he does get his uniform upgrade come the third season, when they revamped everybody's uniforms. We do get to see Data, again, going back to that Chain of Command episode we talked about a little earlier. We do get to see Data wearing a red uniform at one point, because of the Chain of Command episode where I think Riker is stripped of his command by Captain Jellicoe, and Data becomes the number one, of the ship for a short period of time. And there is another Data in a red uniform from another episode, but it's supposed to be an alternate timeline, so it doesn't really matter much. But yes, we do get red uniform Data at some point here. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, like you said before, for people who are trying to figure out what the collar looks like without seeing what we're showing them, imagine kind of like a priest collar without the white. It's that thing that goes around your neck and it creates a little box shape right at the throat. That's the more or less the style they went through. And again, when I see the pictures of them showing their neck and on their bone, like some of them, like the bony part of their top of their chest here, whatever you call that, the what bone? What's that bone that people break sometimes? The collarbone or something like that. It's like, you got to cover that up. Like, it becomes a little more professional. It's not necessarily, you're not necessarily wearing a tie, but it's one notch up from too relaxed.
Yeah, right. And it just looks so, like, there should be something there. I mean, maybe at the time, I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe that was a bit more, acceptable, I guess, in the early 80s. But I don't know. For now, it just seems odd. And I think the clavicle is what we were going for. The clavicle.
It could be that. I forget. Yeah, it's something. It's this right here. I don't know. I forget what it is. Anyway, another thing about these uniforms is that because they just started making them, 2 years later after they started the show, they only had a few to go around. And allegedly, they were somewhere I read that they were costing about $3,000 a piece. So they just couldn't all of a sudden make like 50 of them. They had to only roll them in, through them, obviously the biggest stars of the show. So the retcon way, I think, of saying, how come all of a sudden these guys now are wearing a different costume? It's like, okay, because they're only giving them to executive, staff. And then slowly they're rolling it through the rest of the crew. And you will see that on the episodes, you'll have these guys wearing the new uniforms, but the background guys are going to be wearing the old uniform still. And, like I said, I'm in season 3 and I'm almost done with season 3 and they still have not gone through all of those uniforms. They're still in the process of replacing the old ones a little bit at a time. So it's like, oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting.
Those scenes and shots you get, like the random crew members working in the background. Yeah. It's always fun to see kind of you can pick out things, differences between, what they're wearing, what they're doing or something, as opposed to, the main focused crew.
And obviously they're recycling these uniforms. One guy wears it today, the next guy wears it tomorrow, and you'll see later here in our list that even the stars of the show end up sharing uniforms with other stars of other Star Trek shows. But that's a story for later. Another thing about these new uniforms is that part of how they function is because you don't have that unipiece, that if you sit down, everything pulls in one direction. Now things are independent of each other. So there is no pulling, there is no stretching, but you do see a variation that sometimes, again, when you're watching it in HD, you're going to see certain seams. Sometimes you see 2 seams running right down either side of the breast area, up and down, and sometimes there's no seams at all because they kept modifying these as they went along. They kept tweaking them, making it a little more comfortable. But one of the things that created here, and this is again something that started earlier in the season. There was an episode that has to do with the Stargazer and Picard performing when he was very young, what's called the Picard Maneuver, which is a naval spaceship move, how he saved the day. But then they kind of adopted it as a thing that Patrick Stewart would end up doing with these new uniforms. Even though they were more comfortable, he would always have to tuck them. He would always have to, whenever he would sit down, he would pull down on this jacket so it looked a little, because at first they were very wrinkly. They would rumple up in the shoulders, they would rumple up in the front, and you would see these weird shadows and wrinkles everywhere.
Like the clumping of especially around the shoulder and breast area would be like.
So you would be shocked if you found an episode starting in season 3 where he does not do that multiple times an episode, and then apparently other people started doing it. They started kind of copying him too, because not copying him, but we make sure you fix your jacket when you sit down. And obviously they can't always edit around it. Sometimes they're able to edit, and cut before they fix the shirt. But my God, it could be a drinking game. You could just drink every time you see him or somebody do that. It's ridiculous. But that was one of the unintended consequences of these new. Again, the uniforms look much better. Believe me, I'll take them. But it's like, whoa, what's going on here? How come he's always fixing his costume?
Well, on that note, I actually don't mind things like that because when I watch The Next Generation, everything is so pristine and perfect. And, everything is set up there's no real I hate to say it, but there's no real human characteristics about a lot of the characters. Everyone is just.
I don't think we never saw a bathroom.
Yeah, exactly. There's no real human things going on. So small stuff like that, even them just adjusting the uniform just to sit down. That to me adds to the actual feel of the characters because they feel like, okay, they're doing something that I would do if I was stuck in a uniform. With a lot of the Next Generation stuff, they edit it so much and make everyone's so stiff and formal and perfect. There's no real things or motions like that a lot of the characters do. So that to me adds to it. To be quite honest.
Yeah. And again, they only have 45 minutes to cram all this in, and they cut out so much stuff, from the script that it's a little gem sometimes when you get those imperfections that are they ground the show a little more.
Yeah.
But again, this became an ongoing secret joke that everybody saw basically. Now, another little modification that they did specifically and only for the captain, is they designed a jacket for him that shows up on later seasons and some of the later episodes, where he has this kind of like a burgundy. It matches the color of the uniform pretty much, but it opens up in the middle and it has these leather shoulders.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's interesting. He's got like a little
biker jacket.
It's not exactly. Yeah, it's not exactly like a crazy weather jacket, and it's not exactly a dress uniform jacket. It's kind of like I'm going to a rough neighborhood jacket.
I'm going on the other side of the train tracks jacket.
Yeah, I better wear my rough guy jacket because you never know what happens. And apparently, if you look carefully, even that jacket, which is also, again, I believe it's like the first Playmates figure that they made out of Picard, he's wearing that jacket. The first Playmates figure doesn't even have the traditional unitard costume or the new fixed-up costume. It's him wearing the jacket. You're like, oh, wait a minute, I don't remember him wearing. He does wear a jacket. And one of the main reasons, which I guess they picked that figure to be the first one, is that at that time, we had kind of caught up already. And once these figures started coming out, we were already kind of very close to the end, of the Next Generation, life. And it was during this period where Picard every now and then started wearing a jacket, so that's kind of how it started, for the figure. But it's almost impossible to get things right from the beginning. Even that jacket had to be modified because apparently the leather started to smell. I guess under the lights or whatever, and he started to complain that there was this awful smell coming from the jacket. So in some later episodes, you'll notice that instead of this leathery kind of black shoulder area, now it's more of a cloth. It more matches the rest of it. It's still black. It still makes a difference in the colors, but it's a different material. So again, little things that you'll notice as you start to watch the show.
Yeah, the material looks like it went from like the leather pads to like that quilted material that shows up later on in the gray. It's like they kind of like that quilt, that textured quilted material, which I really like. I think it looks pretty cool.
Now, another type of costume that you're going to run into briefly that is insignificant at first but very significant later is the cadet uniform. At some point, I forget which episode it is, that you see a cadet, I don't know if it was Cadet Wesley or another cadet, wearing a uniform that has kind of like the reverse colors. In other words, there's only color on the shoulders and everything underneath is black. And you're like, what the hell is that? Well, we easily forget about that, but that's going to come and haunt us later when we're dealing with DS9 and what happens later with the movies and with everything that happens afterwards. But it's interesting to remember that it kind of made a little preview in Next Generation.
Yeah, the reverse color, the reverse flip of that is something that definitely shows up later on, and sort of stick with it.
Right, because what's happening also as the show is progressing, this is a franchise, so that they start overlapping shows. So now you have this show is going, and then you have other shows, especially DS9, in the works as this is happening. And also in Voyager, you're going to see a little bit of that too. So there's a lot of little back and forths where all of a sudden these shows, one uniform starts showing up on another episode and back and forth. So Voyager is another one I think that when I think of that reverse color scheme is where, that one ends up at.
The cadet uniform also, it did have the flipped colors, but it also had like the all gray.
There were different ones, yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. Because I know in Deep Space Nine, they had like the cadets wore like that gray. They had like the base of it was gray, but the shoulders were still the color of whatever section you were working in.
Yes, yeah, you're right. They did have different ones, but like I said, I guess they tested them out and see what stuck, what color schemes would work. Obviously, they probably modify the crap out of them, but you start to see these little, that looks a little different. What's going on here? So all of a sudden now, you have a number of things happening. You have Next Generation is continuing and kind of starting to come to an end. This particular pattern of uniform that we just talked about stayed on, for the entire remainder of the television show at least. And like we said before, it's not just every color variation is using this particular format at this point. the show is going to kind of springboard into the first film. So now they're thinking, oh my God, we gotta. This is the first film. This is Generations. We need a new uniform because every time we do something new, we got to start from scratch. And then the other thing running at the same time would be DS9, where at this point they are now running with the new color scheme that we just mentioned before, which is a reverse, which is basically a copy of that cadet thing that I was telling you about, which is the colored top, above the breast line, top red, gold, whatever you are, completely black underneath, and a gray shirt kind of sticking out from the collar. So there's your designations of colors, and they're going completely black, which, again, it makes a little more sense as far as if you're a military organization, you want to be in darker colors, especially if you're on the field, a little harder for them to see you. They always say, like, don't you remember, like, you watch all these war movies, they're like, don't salute me, damn it. If you salute me, the enemy's going to know and they're going to start to shoot me. Well, here, they're basically waving flags as to shoot the guy in red, shoot the guy in red. So, okay, we have to, I know it's a show, relax, calm down, Carlos, count to 10. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so they're doing their thing over there, which is fine. Okay. Generations comes on. They want to redo the uniforms again because it's a new movie and it's the beginning of everything. And they design, the same gentleman that was working on the show designs a new costume. And the new costume is a weird combination of a lot of things because it has a slight double-breasted look to it. They eliminate the V shape. Remember that W shape that comes in the stomach with the different... That's gone already. Now you have a more traditional red on top, black on the bottom. So that's how it was supposed to go. The pips are supposed to now move down from the collar a little closer to the top of that breast cut. And guess what comes back out of the blue? The stripes on the cuffs. The old stripes that we used to have, they're back all of a sudden. So they start kind of making those costumes. And not only do they make those costumes, but this is a traditional, oh my God, what the hell just happened moment. The action figures start getting... Remember, action figures get designed way, way, way in advance. When you see them in the store, they've been working on them for almost a year sometimes. Yeah. Well, that is what happened here. They use these early designs to create the action figures, and by the time the action figures are out, it is too late because they changed their mind. They said that it's not working out, they don't look right, they don't fit right. And they also said something about how because they were introducing so many new things, to this new movie. It's a new ship, it's a new lighting scheme, a lot newer people in them. We have to kind of scale back on introducing yet another aspect that people will just be jarred by. Oh my God, now we got to deal with new uniforms. Who do you believe? It's up to you who you want to believe. The bottom line is that they actually shot some scenes that were obviously cut out of the film, and there is a shot of Geordi from a deleted scene somewhere that you can find on the internet of him being tortured by, I think it was Dr. Soren or something, and he is wearing this new costume. It's a horrible looking quality thing, but at least it's proof that they actually went as far as design them and they were starting to use them. But I guess whatever happened. They stopped using them and they were like, oh crap, now what do we do? We're filming the movie. These damn action figures are already made, which the action figures came out with the wrong uniform. I have the entire line of and I will eventually do a show on this. And I'm looking at these figures going, what the hell is going on here? These are not the characters I just saw. What's going on here? What, did I miss a scene in the movie? This is a deleted scene? I don't know what's going on. But yeah, they jumped the gun and all of a sudden they pulled them. So what do we do at this point? We have a movie. We started shooting already. So what they do is they go and borrow uniforms from DS9. So all of a sudden you start to see the DS9 look, which is the color on top, black on the bottom, with the little gray collar. But guess what? Not everybody does that. In other words, some characters wear that and some characters stick to their older costumes. So when you watch Generations, you're going to see scenes where one character is wearing the old costume, one character is wearing a new costume. So that was something that kind of like threw everybody for like, what the hell just happened?
That's
so
not the only thing that threw people for a loop in that movie.
Well, yeah, it didn't help. The Curse of the Odd Film hit really strong, and man, did it hit. Because as far as costumes goes, this is where now the films are trying to get away from because the show is over, and because we have these other shows now in the works, those costumes start to kind of take over. I mean, do you remember that bizarre little change?
I don't actually specifically, because I was probably too young to recall that that level of detail. Even for me, I think that would have been pretty spectacular if I would have picked up on something.
Don't feel bad, because I didn't understand this until I did this research now. I did wonder. I remember with the action figures wondering, why is there a difference in costumes? But I never really had a straight answer until I looked at these books that I'm like surrounded by them. It's like, oh, that's what happened. There's some videos out there. There's some YouTube videos just about that problem. You can just, do the research there too.
Yep. And there's even one, I think Junkball Media, I think, has a video on it where like the different abandoned costumes that like some sort of like concept designs and everything were proposed and sort of abandoned. But for me, rather, I saw all these costumes back when I was younger, far younger. I would see all the different costume changes, but I never correlated one costume change, specifically for it being more problematic. I just thought, like, oh, they're changing it up because they want to look different or they want to sell new toys or something. I never really traced it back to it being, for a specific problem or for like production, issues going on or what have you.
The other thing is that if you have to kind of freeze frame and look at things. Riker, who is wearing a DS9 costume, apparently that came from Cisco. In other words, the actor, he had to borrow, because those guys are tall. Those Riker and Cisco are pretty tall individuals, so that's the only one they could borrow to fit him. And apparently also the one that Geordi wears belongs to Miles O'Brien.
And there's a size difference, right?
There's a size difference because Miles is a little taller, and you can see his cuffs. They kind of go, below the wrist, and it's like, what's going on here? What's wrong with this?
Which begs the question: Why didn't he just push up the sleeve a little bit for that shot?
Exactly.
He could have just pushed it up a little bit.
Exactly, and a reason why it might or might not have worked is because in DS9, O'Brien, I think, wears it rolled up a little bit, and you can see the gray shirt underneath, coming through the rest of the arm, the rest of the wrist. So you could see that variation of that gray. So maybe he just didn't want to look exactly like O'Brien, but you figure the costume designer on set would have said, you know what, let me just bring this up an inch or two.
Yeah,
but
really.
Again, it's a little blooper, I guess you could call it. But that's part of the thing where all of a sudden people are wearing... Not everybody's wearing the same costume, and the costumes that they are wearing, some of them belong to the series, and some of them belong to DS9. So it's like, okay. So at that point, I guess they pretty much said, all right, that's the direction we're going. This is where these costumes are going to go. But just like anything else, guess what? We get to the next movie, which is First Contact,
yes,
and they try something different.
Now, they try something different here, and I think, to me, this is where they hit. It's the peak Star Trek look to me. I guess also I might be biased on this because this was my first Star Trek movie that I consciously saw. And I always say that because I saw the other ones before, but I probably wasn't aware of me actually watching Star Trek. I just saw lasers. So this is my favorite style of costume, where it's a bit more subdued, but the look of it just seems, on camera, it just looks a lot better than the sort of over-the-top colors that the other shoulder pads had.
Now, I'm not entirely certain how this costume was introduced. In other words, I think it was introduced in this movie, and then later on, it made its way to DS9. And by that, I'm talking about the gray shoulders with the black bottoms, and the colored shirt sneaking in through the collar. This is, again, if you're going for practicality and realism, I think this is the best costume in terms of how a military unit would wear something, because now everybody looks almost the same. You have to really look careful at the neck to see which shirt is peeking through to be able to tell, what they're wearing underneath. This is again, to me, it's a completely acceptable look, and it's a completely acceptable progression to how these costumes have morphed through the years.
I think actually First Contact actually came out before they were introduced in the show. Actually, I think his First Contact came out in '96.
Yes.
Uniforms in DS9 changed in season 5, and season 5 started in '97.
Good. So they went backwards this time. The movie influenced the. Okay, good. So we're good. Now, another interesting thing that I noticed in some of these later movies, like First Contact, even Insurrection, and even Nemesis, is that we do get to see another version of the dress uniform, which is more of a Marine's uniform. It's this white, very formal, very Marine-like version in Nemesis, which is kind of neat that even the dress uniforms keep continuing to get fancier and fancier and fancier.
Yeah. The all-white uniforms, which actually threw me off, because I remember when Discovery came, we saw the white medical in Discovery. The medical officers have all white, and so when I first saw Discovery, I was like, oh, they're bringing back the Admiralty sort of looking uniform from Nemesis. But then I realized that so they're making medical all have the white uniforms in Discovery, which we didn't touch on before, but I thought that was actually pretty cool, having the medical in Discovery be all white like Cobra has.
And just like in DS9, when they eventually switch over to the gray shoulder, black bottoms, obviously Voyager cannot do that because Voyager is lost in space, so they got to stick to their DS9 looking uniform. So that's kind of makes sense. Makes logical sense that you're not going to just change. I'm surprised they didn't work it into one of those transmissions they received on the later seasons. It's like, oh, by the way, you guys are 30 years away from getting here. Hey, can you guys change your uniforms while you're out there? Just here's the design. You figure that they would have said, oh, that's okay. The replicator was able to do it in 20 minutes. But no, they kind of came back wearing their original uniform, so that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Now, moving forward, and again, this is as far as we can take this, as far as the timeline goes. Now, don't get me wrong. We've seen 1 million episodes of all of the Star Trek variations where they are visited by different timelines, travelers, different periods in time, all good things. There are a lot of other alternative, if you will, uniforms that are out there, or future versions or alternate versions of the Federation. And there's some really interesting designs. I know for all good things, Crusher is wearing this, Beverly's wearing this red variation on it that is really cool looking.
Oh yeah, I do remember that.
So I'm not, I don't count those because those are kind of like I said, they're alternate. And I know there's also some of the movies where Picard takes off his jacket and underneath he's wearing like a vest. So,
yeah.
He's worn many vests, and so has Shatner. I think I was on Generations. He's wearing a Starfleet vesty type, but again, he's very old, and they have to kind of build a costume around his shape at this point. They can't force him to wear something that he's not going to look. I mean, he's going to look whatever he's going to look, but they're trying to minimize, obviously, his
just trying to make it look the most flattering for his age.
Yeah, as much as possible. And the best thing about Shatner is that, man, does his hair change, because obviously he's wearing a rug most of the time. And even nowadays, I watch certain commercials because he works like a horse. The man doesn't stop. Everywhere. I'm convinced if you give him enough money, he'll come to your house and sing happy birthday for you. And he might be wearing the best piece ever, because sometimes he's wearing these unbelievable. I'm like, if I didn't know any better, I think this was his real hair. And it's amazing how sometimes they completely miss the mark, and sometimes he is just incredible what he's wearing. But yeah, you kind of, he's not going to be the poster boy for the uniform of the month. So I'm not going to count those again. But however, with Picard, this new series, even though we got a very tiny glimpse, a little teaser, and then later we got the full-blown trailer, we see now that, how many years later is this? 30, 20 years later or something?
I think like 25, 30 years later, yeah.
Okay. We do get to see a new Starfleet uniform. I'm not sure if it's a cadet, because if I'm looking at the pips, this might be it might not necessarily be a cadet, but just a new standard level of uniform. It seems to follow where we're at right now as far as Voyager goes, because it looks like they got away from the gray tops and they're back to the color tops. But instead of a solid line, it's a different kind of little up and down kind of different design of
it
how
looks
that
like a geometry problem here. It's a bunch of shapes and
and the comm badge is different, and it looks almost like the collar might be a little higher now, with a little bit of a V shape underneath. So from what little of what we've seen, and again, this is only a snapshot. Who knows? They might, for all we know, they redesigned it again and they haven't shown us yet. What do you think is coming?
This uniform looks more tactical. I mean, this looks like if you were to show me this uniform without actually having any context to it, it looks like this would be like a tactical uniform. Like if they were, I think because of like the sharp lines on the separating the color, it looks like this is more like a tactical military uniform. It doesn't strike me as like a actual normal bridge worn uniform. And I'm looking at this here as well, and it looks like there's a full body shot of the full uniform.
Now, the other graphic that you're looking at shows that the shoes are a different color?
Yeah, the picture I'm looking at is, now again, not sure how official this is, so just throwing it out there, but this concept looks like from top to bottom, it follows the normal black, but the shoes themselves are move away from the normal black boots that they wear to now it looks like more like a brown mud-colored boot that it looks like they're wearing. So I'm not sure if that's going to be for every uniform, but it looks like they're moving away from the all black boots to now a more like brown sort of dusty colored boot.
Yeah, so this is just the preliminary stuff that we basically took a little peek at. They could expand on this. Now, granted, the show itself, from what I understand, is not from the point of view of the Federation. He's not acting as a Federation captain. Whatever happens in this show, I think it's more of him as a private citizen.
Yeah.
But he will have some Federation interacting with the Federation and some other major. I mean, we saw Romulans, we saw Borg, we saw all kinds of different typical Trek storylines that are going to be crossing. But it's not him in his luxury spaceship, flying around. So we'll see how much they actually do give us.
Because, like you said, it's not the show perspective isn't from the Federation, from Starfleet. So right. I'm hoping the fact that because that's the case, we don't get this sort of always so formal good guys. Starfleet is this view of them. We get more of like a sort of from the outside. So maybe we might see more sort of candid shots of what goes on in Starfleet. From the eyes of someone who's not directly, in the middle of it anymore. So I'm really hoping we get a lot of new, different, looks and different feel of what Starfleet is going to be looking like, in the sort of near future. Because obviously we know from Discovery, 1,000 years, Starfleet doesn't exist anymore. So
one little thing I like to add about this new costume also, because I have a shot here, a nice tight close-up of the guy from the trailer. From the guy from the teaser. I believe it was the teaser, the guy that's interviewing him. He has one pip, so I guess that probably makes him an ensign. And the collar, like I said, it's taller, and the opening is like a V-shaped opening, and underneath it's a black shirt.
Yeah.
So there is a variation, at least in their inner shirt, that matches now all the rest of the black that's underneath them. And like we mentioned earlier, the new insignia, because it is the future, so they have a new insignia for the show, which is kind of neat. So, we've gone from one end of the spectrum to the other. We obviously were not able to hit every single thing that ever came out, but as far as the progression of the timeline of Star Trek that we're in right now, which is the one that has been visited the most, the next gen, I think, has the most material produced, I would imagine, because it's Next Gen, DS9, and Voyager, and now plus a couple of movies, and now we're gonna get hit with Picard. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the most original series is original series. Enterprise, you can't put them next to original, and you can't put them next to Discovery. Those are individual things that live outside their own worlds. The original series does have the movies. But as far as volume goes, this is the most amount of information that we have as far as the history of the uniforms, for the Federation, for at least that time period, I think.
Yeah, and even the TOS TV show didn't even really follow the same style of uniforms as the movie. They completely shifted. So TNG really has like the most lasting appeal, in terms of consistency of uniforms. Like even though they changed, the changes are more incremental. TOS, the movies, was a pretty big change. So,
What's cool is that sometimes on, I don't know if DS9, but definitely on Voyager and even in Next Generations, no, actually DS9 too, they do purposely give you these older flashback kind of things where you see like Cisco wearing the traditional Next Generation uniform in that first episode when his wife gets killed. And then you do have Janeway, I think at one point from the past, she's wearing the movie red jacket.
Yep.
So, you do get some of those moments. I think you might even get some of the Picard at Starfleet Academy where he's younger and he's wearing variations on different costumes and stuff like that. So it's really interesting.
You can't forget the episode Trouble with Tribbles where the DS9 crew goes back to the entire TOS
That's
era.
That's amazing what they did in that episode.
I was going to say, like, that's such a fun episode. Like, it's just seeing even someone who I don't have the nostalgia for the first TOS era, like just going back and having them all dressed in the colorful uniforms and sneaking in, it's so fun to watch, even just from the uniform point of view.
No, yeah, and I really wish they would try and do something like that again, because they succeeded so much, and it wasn't like they were overdo. It's not like, oh my God, every show has to have one version. No, we've gone through like 4 or 5 shows already. Throw in another one weird, don't get me wrong. What Discovery did with the with the Tholians, that completely blew me away. The way that they were able to match, in their own way, but a full-blown Tribble episode like that, oh my God, that was amazing.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Steve, for joining me on this extra long show that we always think we're going to do a 30-minute and then turns into an hour and a half. This has been great. I love it. This is great. And the costumes and the uniforms are going to just continue as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Especially looking forward to Picard. We have a bunch of new Trek coming out. We have the Picard series. We didn't even really touch on it, but the animated series brought in. I'm sure we could. This because there is a slight difference between the animated series costumes, but that would be a whole nother.
That's a whole other.
Yeah. And we have a whole bunch of new Trek coming up. Hopefully, we get a lot more costumes, a lot more, even maybe outside of Starfleet, even.
And Discovery is coming, and now Discovery is going to be jumping around time-wise. So wait a minute, you never know where Discovery might bump against something that we already know, and we have the short treks coming too.
Have you seen? Is there a costume change in Discovery season 3?
I have not seen anything new yet. But again, if they're kind of in a situation like Voyager, where they're outside the communication with their normal time frame, then they shouldn't be able to update their uniforms.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Technically, they have to be still wearing the same exact stuff they were wearing.
Unless they're secretly keeping in touch with us without everybody else knowing about it. And they're sending them the designs like we were theorizing earlier. But yeah, there's lots coming down the pipeline. Well, again, thank you, Steve.
Hey, thank you, Carlos. Thanks to everyone. Hope we've got to be back. Hopefully we'll do more consistent shows again, moving forward. So thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. You got it. All right. I hope everybody enjoyed today's show. Again, we did something a little different. We were able to use video on this one, especially when it comes to trying to show you the difference on a topic such as Star Trek uniforms, how these uniforms change from year to year, from show to show. It's the type of thing that you really, really need to show, through video. We are going to continue, hopefully, in the future, as I mentioned before, with Playmates. We have different topics scheduled and planned out and mapped out, but sooner or later I'm sure we're going to hit Star Wars in some kind of video presentation like this. So on behalf of everybody, I want to thank Steve, as usual, for joining me and being such a great contributor to this subject. I know he's a huge Star Trek fan, and obviously you guys for listening or watching. So we will see you here next time at GeekFest Rants. Goodbye, everybody.
In 3 separate realities, I'm moving back and forth through time, putting the lives of his entire crew at risk.
What you're asking for is impossible.
Picard must stop the greatest threat to mankind.
Red alert!
All crew to battle stations. In a deadly showdown with his most powerful enemy.
Humanity's fate has been sealed. You will be destroyed.
Next time on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
If you would like to subscribe to our show, send us messages, or see video links to some of the topics we talked about today, please visit our homepage at geekfestrants.com or our YouTube channel, Facebook page, or iTunes at GeekFest Rants.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
GeekFest Rants is produced by Carlos Perone, copyright 2019.
This broadcast is part of the IC Robots Radio Network. Visit icrobots.com for this and many other nerd/nostalgia related podcasts. You won't be sorry for long.